Hello and welcome to Neutron One. I'm Jack.
And I'm Stuart. Welcome to this introductory video to Quantum Speaker. So you would have seen, hopefully, our free pack, the Neutron XL amp profile pack that we put out free a few weeks ago, which included a preview Quantum Speaker profile. But this is the real deal. This is the full pack. And it's going to take a few videos to explain it all. But we want to go through it all kind of methodically so you get a chance to see and understand all of the fun and games that's going on here. It's a completely new thing, fully non-linear, accurate speaker profiles. So not simulating the behavior, not using algorithms like some companies are doing at the moment to kind of bridge the gap between IRs and real non-linear speaker behavior. This is actually captured directly from the real speaker with the real microphones, plural, and you'll see that there are a lot of those in the pack as well. And we're going to go through, in this video, just show you all the mics that are in the pack and explain what they are and what they're for. Talk a little bit before we begin about the speaker itself and the ways that you mic it up and where the positions are that we'll be referring to, what they represent physically on the cone. And then go through some quick start files. We've got some pre-combined profiles that are multiple microphones combined into one, what we call a quick start, that you can use just to jump straight in without having to worry about blending mics and all that kind of thing. But then we're going to go through all the individual microphones in the pack and talk about those, what they represent sonically and how you might use them. And then that'll be it for this one. In the next video, we're going to go through combining those. And then in a third one, we're going to do some really advanced mic technique stuff, because these profiles really represent, and you should think of them as representations of a microphone in front of a speaker. So if you were to go to a recording studio and professionally mic up a guitar cabinet, what would be coming back into the mixing console, what you'd be recording to your DAW or tape machine, would be the direct feed from each mic that you would then maybe combine to make the final sound, each one doing a different job in terms of creating that sound. The traditional way of doing it, rather than starting with something that's maybe not what you want and then using EQ to get the sound. The use of microphones is a kind of an old dark art, I guess you could say, in the professional audio world. It's one of the kind of great pursuits of audio engineers to master microphone technique and understand how to use them well to capture at the source as close to the sound that you want as possible, in order that you then need to use the minimum amount of EQ, because EQ is quite phase destructive. It's not a clean way to manipulate the sound. Capturing it with the microphone in the first instance and with the speaker that you like as well is much better at changing the characteristics of a sound without distorting the frequency response in uneven ways. So like when I say an uneven way, I could explain that maybe like on a musical instrument, you can imagine that you have low notes and high notes. Imagine that an equalizer would effectively, and this is in reality what happens, when you create an EQ curve with an equalizer, as opposed to doing that with a microphone or a speaker, you're effectively turning individual notes up and down, right? Because a frequency is a note. A note is a frequency. If you boost a narrow band, a specific frequency with an equalizer, if you were to then play the note that is that frequency, it would be louder than the others. And because it doesn't contain, an equalizer doesn't contain that non-linearity of a speaker and a microphone, that would even that out in the same kind of way that a valve does in a guitar amplifier, the reason people love them is they have that natural ability to even out all of the frequencies to sound really nice and cohesive without having these kind of nasty individual frequencies sticking out. It makes everything sound smooth and great, which is why in 2024 we're still using vacuum tubes from 100 years ago or whatever. So this is really a kind of real basic introduction to the pack. The contents, the microphones that we have, how they sound, what they're for. and hopefully will give you a good grounding in what to expect going into the more advanced videos where we then talk about, how you combine those together to create the effects that you want, the sounds that you want. So before we begin, I'm just going to quickly show you and talk about a image of a speaker. Here we go. Just get rid of that camera. There we go. So what you're seeing here is a typical guitar speaker. I should explain that this pack that we're introducing, the first one is the Celestion, based on the Celestion 25 watt Greenback, the kind of all-time classic guitar speaker, you could say, used by countless people over the years.
You can see why they show the back instead of the front, though.
Yeah, it's green on the back. It
looks great on the back.
It's a piece of cardboard on the front, right?
That was my Astral 1.4.
Quite literally made of paper fibers, cardboard, and resin, a bit of glue. And very, very basic, and equally, it's only a 25 watt speaker. The original Greenback's not loud, and people think of guitar speakers as being these like behemoths of volume, but and they can be, certainly, and in a lot of cases when they get to those volumes, they're way beyond their tolerance, and they're doing all kinds of weird non-linear things, which is exactly what this product is designed to capture and reproduce authentically.
The voodoo.
The cool stuff. When people design guitar speakers, and ask any of the engineers who design them, they explain that the design of a speaker, the whole purpose of designing a speaker, is about how it will sound when it goes beyond the natural tolerance of the materials.
Yeah,
because a speaker, when it's within its normal tolerance, it's not going past the point of the coil exertion where it can't move far enough to reproduce the signal that you're putting into it. As long as it's within those tolerances, effectively it's an entirely linear equalizer. And by an equalizer, I just mean the design of the physical speaker itself being large. In the case of a guitar speaker, can't reproduce very high frequencies. That's why when you have a hi-fi speaker, you'll be used to seeing the two different cones, the little small tweeter that is just for high frequencies, and the bigger woofer, the bass speaker, which is for the mid, low, mid, and bass frequencies. So a guitar speaker doesn't have the tweeter; it doesn't have the high frequency capability of a tweeter. So it's mainly that mid, low, mid, and bass. So because of that physical limitation of the design of the cone, it's effectively, while it's within its exertion range and not getting into the non-linear behavior of being louder than its tolerance, it's basically just an equalizer. It's just taking top end off the sound, makes it sound darker. It doesn't reproduce the high frequencies, so you don't hear them. And that's, kind of where the story ends when you talk about quiet speakers. But the real fun with guitar speakers, their purpose for existing,
On the edge.
the purpose for them existing is how they sound when they're loud.
Yeah.
When they go beyond that normal tolerance and get into the zone where they are literally, like going,
That's the magic. That's the sound that everyone hears.
They can't accurately reproduce the signal that you're putting into them at that point, so they start doing interesting random things. That's nonlinear behavior in the world of speakers, right? So that's also the desirable behavior in terms of reproducing the sound of a guitar speaker, because, of course, all the iconic recordings of guitars going into the kind of the classic period, I guess you could say, the heyday of recording guitar sounds, they were all recorded loud. So that characteristic behavior,
all of them,
every single one. I mean,
no one came in, as you said on one of the other videos, and said, "Can we have a quiet?
Can we try this really quick?" Okay, maybe if it was like a very specific sound that people were trying to create, or maybe it was a clean tone and they wanted it to be pristine. Or maybe they were Brian May and they were playing around with like a little radio speaker, and there's all kinds of
that thing you first hear, and you're like, yes.
I'm saying that, I bet even that little deaky speaker that Brian May
was on the limit,
was way beyond what it was meant to be in terms of volume. And so people have been experimenting for years with this idea of nonlinear behavior in the speaker, and it adding another layer of interest and complexity to what's already there from the preamp and the power amp in your valve. Guitar amplifier. It's a third stage to that process. It's more like real world analog compression and speaker distortion, which is not you wouldn't recognize it like a distortion pedal or even the distortion you'd hear in a valve amp. It's something else. It's a really smooth sounding, another one of those things that is a natural evener out.
Yeah.
It naturally makes things sound nice and gets rid of spiky frequencies, because of course once a speaker is in that state of being incapable of accurately reproducing the incoming signal and almost in panic mode where it's just doing the best it can, if you feed it one really loud frequency in that scenario, it's going to be like, well, you can just get in the soup with everyone else, like, and that gets evened out. And but that's the great thing about that situation of the nonlinear stage of a speaker's behavior, is it's a great leveler, and it gets rid of all the nasty sounding stuff, and it gives you this really lovely even reproduction. So we'll probably not get in too much into we'll turn it up and down, and I'll show you how that works and how the input control works in the context of the microphone capture, like what it means to have it quiet and have it loud, and how those gradients of input level naturally reproduce the volume that the speaker is at. And so you can then set that volume to where you want it to be, from linear, really, when it's really quiet, like an impulse response, just flat snapshot linear, very quiet, to very, very active in what it's doing to the sound when it starts to get into the higher end of the signal level and way into speaker distortion and compression, and then it starts to do things that are immediately audible, right? And they can be extreme at the very high ends of that range. So anyway, just quickly want to describe for you a couple of concepts that will be familiar to some, but maybe not to everyone. And because we're going to be talking about these concepts and I'm going to be using these terms, I'd just rather explain them first so that everyone's on the same page. So I'll be talking about the cap on the speaker. That means the dust cap. And you can see what it's pointing at here is this round dome in the middle. The coil is under here. And the dust cap is designed exactly as you would expect from what it's called, to prevent dust entering the coil and seizing it up and stopping it from moving nicely. That's a lubricated, almost like a piston, right? You apply an electrical current to it and it moves the coil using electromagnetism from one end of its excursion range to the other, which then pushes the paper cone, in this case paper, forward or pulls it back. And then the feeding it the frequencies reproduces that frequency of sound, right? The typical name for this is the dust cap. Some people call it the center. We're going to use cap. It's just going to be called cap in our context. It's nice and short for us to use in file names as well, so you'll know what that means. It means the bit in the middle that's dome-shaped, all right? It has a particular sound as well. This is the brightest sounding area of the speaker. The closer you get to the middle, the brighter it will sound. And actually, if you consider how this appears, and then consider how a tweeter looks on a hi-fi speaker, your high frequency, small, dome-shaped, typically 1-inch speaker, it's not a surprise that, although even this looks the same, it actually does have a brighter characteristic as well. It's not a tweeter, it's not the same, but it does have the highest concentration of high frequency content right in the middle there. Then you have the cap edge. The cap edge is the point at which it bonds to the cone. The cone is the big main area here of the speaker itself. This ridged area, it's made of cardboard in this case, and dunked or painted with a coating. This is called the cone, and a lot of people mix these up. They think the cone is the bit in the middle. It's not. The cone is the large area of the speaker, the part that moves on the coil and moves air. So the cap edge is the joining between the cap and the cone, this glue sticky stuff here. And it has a particular characteristic because it's the kind of crossover point between the brightness of the cap and the darker sound of the cone. So that's considered to be a sweet spot on a lot of speakers where you would want to put a mic. And so one of the positions obviously we have is that cap edge position. Then you've got the cone, which is the big part, and it has very little real difference between, about halfway up it and right to the edge. It does get slightly darker the closer you go towards the edge, but it's not like a huge range of difference. as much as going from the dead center to maybe here would be, right? This is where the action is in terms of bright or not bright, and much more useful to use a different or the correct microphone to get to the sound that you want than going any further down the dullness of being right on the edge. The speaker moves very little here. The motion is all in the middle. It's like a piston, right? So the range of motion is in the center area here, not the cap. The cap doesn't move. The cap is fixed, and the cone moves over it, right? So the bit here, as you can see in this diagram, it's ridged up to about the third or fourth ridge, and inwards are the real areas of interest for us in terms of capturing the sound of the speaker at its prime. And loads of people do experiment and they try all kinds of things, but after a lifetime of recording guitar speakers, I can say that 9.999 times out of 10, when you go to mic up a speaker and you start experimenting, the range of positions that you're interested in the most are between the center and about 2/3 of the way up the cone. So there's only one other thing really to know, and that's the concept of axis. I'll explain what that is. I'm just going to turn the video back on for this one. So imagine that my hand here is the speaker cone. Okay, on axis means it's pointing the right angle here, pointing straight at the place on the speaker that you want to mic up. That's on axis. Yeah, so imagine it's axial, it's pointing straight at it. So off axis means it's pointing at the same spot on the speaker. So let's say in this example, that's the cap right in the middle. It's pointing at the same place, but it's not pointing straight at it. It's at an angle. So the typical angle you would use is 45 degrees because for phase purposes, that works well. So on axis means it's pointing straight at it. Off axis means it's pointing at an angle at it. Yeah. So those are really the only concepts that you need to know in terms of understanding all the microphone positions that are in the pack, with one caveat, which is with ribbon mics, they always tend to be slightly off axis, but not necessarily in the same way that I've just described as you would with the dynamic. Ribbon microphones are very sensitive. They're very easy to break. And when you're talking about extremely loud sound sources, like a guitar speaker on full tilt, especially when you're close to it, if you have a ribbon microphone facing bang on a high-powered speaker, it can actually rip the ribbon completely and ruin it. So you'll always have them slightly tilted off axis, but not like not necessarily 45 degrees, but you'll have it so that the sound is glancing off the ribbon in such a way that it's at least taking the edge of the pressure
like tank
off. So with all the positions that are close with a ribbon, just take it for granted they are slightly off axis because that is required in order to preserve the ribbon and stop it from being destroyed. Other than that, we're good to go. I think that's all you need to know. So we're going to jump now into Reaper. We've got one sound today that we're going to play with, and just so you can see what that is, it's from our wonderful Van Halen Producer Series pack. I've chosen the sound from Jump, which is my favorite from the pack. It's a hard choice, but that one I find not my favorite. I think it's the most versatile. It's kind of the most generic of all of those that sounds kind of good, just in the that's a great sounding amp profile sense. Yeah. And because we're working with a DI here, this doesn't have the production part on it. So this is literally just the sound of the amp. I'm going to show you that now. I'm going to show you the dry sound by turning, it's already off. So the quantum speaker is off right now. So this is the DI. It's not going to sound nice because there's no speaker on this, right? Imagine this coming right out of the power amp of the amp. Just to calibrate your ears, okay? That's the raw amplifier with no speaker. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you the quick start profiles that we have in the pack. So this is a really complex product in terms of what it's capable of. It doesn't have to be complex to use, though. And although we're going to go through this process of explaining the mics and how you use them and how you combine them and all the advanced stuff, I thought it would be great for us to just give you some quick start files that are pre-combined by me. Just, kind of the classics, I guess you could say. Things that people do quite a lot. Different types of sound that represent a few different combinations of common mic blends, so that you can just jump right in and put it on something and play it, and just one profile and hear and play with things like the non-linearity of the input gain. So anyway, I'm going to show you these now. There's 5 of these. The names describe hopefully pretty well, what these blends represent. Kind of what I'm thinking in my head. If I want to get that, this is what I'm going to do. So the ambient one is, as it sounds, kind of like the amp in the room with you. So obviously there's room mics blended in. There's a close microphone. There's a condenser microphone as well on another cone in the 412 to give you a kind of balance. You have the brightness of a center mic from a dynamic. You've got the roundness of a condenser on the cone, and then you've got room mic further back in the room as well to kind of give you the sense of space. And that's, it's quite loud here. So you'll hear it sounds kind of like an amp in the room. Ambient, it's called. A lot of people talk about as well, I've seen that there aren't many guitar products that cater for people who want to hear the sound of an amp in the room with you, like as if you were in there with it. Obviously, you can have any sound you want with this pack. You've got individual building blocks that you can craft, as much or as little room, or room positions, or, different sounding room mics. There's a lot going on, and you'll see that as we go through them all. So this is not really like a traditional impulse response pack in the way that you use it. These are building blocks. Think of this like a huge Lego kit where you can build any sound that you want with that speaker, rather than somebody else's pre-made conception of what they think you should use, how they think it should sound. I've done these and they are here, but they are literally quick starts just for you to play with. But really, from my perspective, I see this as something that you want to get engaged with and learn how to use. And we used an analogy earlier talking about, it was quite funny, like the idea of like a microwave meal, your impulse response being that kind of pre-cooked, pre-packaged, somebody else's kind of recipe, and you don't really understand what went into creating it, kind of thing, versus us giving you the ingredients and the instructions and explaining the techniques and you cooking your own meal, from that perspective. That's kind of more what this represents, what we're doing here, the individual ingredients and how you use them, and giving you the knowledge to then go, okay, I want to go and create this kind of sound. I know what all of these things do, so if I do this, it should sound like what I want. And that's where we want you to get to, really. So that's why we're going to explain it all. So second one here is called Balanced, and it is, as it says, a bit of everything, not too much of anything. A nice bright sound with a bit of bottom end added in with a ribbon, a tiny bit of room, but not too much, and just kind of right down the middle.
It's a lovely speaker.
Yeah, we're not even playing with the input level at this stage, right? So you're not even getting into the whole. I mean, it's banging in the middle here, which means this is how the middle ground of the profile set, which is for me is the sweet spot of the speaker. And this is the real trick when you record with microphones on a guitar speaker. Ideally, and especially ideally when we're creating a profile, you want to profile the speaker at the point where it's just dipping in and out of the nonlinear stuff. Yeah. But the difference with a profile like this and the way that you're going to use it is actually I am profiling all the behavior right to the extremes, even though you're not necessarily hearing that at the input level of 0, because you have to bear in mind when I'm feeding it the signal to capture it, that signal is going in way hotter because you've got like, a peak here set. If you look at the input level here, that's calibrated for where we recommend, which is between sort of -6 and -12 on the input. If you go and look at one of our other videos, we'll put a link in the description for that. It explains how you calibrate the levels. There's a quick start guide for it. And that's kind of important because it stops you clipping the signal. But if you actually look at the situation there, you've got quite a big range above the signal level of what I'm playing. And that was profile, because it's profile at the extreme,
Yeah.
right? So it's all been captured. And you can then start, boosting that level up. So if we go, let's go up a bit. 10 up. You hear it starting to compress and do all kinds of juicy stuff. If I then do the opposite, and we turn that volume all the way down, all right, it's quieter.
It's like...
Now you're kind of into impulse response territory, right?
Yeah.
There's no non-linear behavior down there at all. Now, I'd like to think the microphones are still well placed, well chosen. You'll notice in these packs as well, we don't name microphones, and that's not to be like difficult. It's actually for the opposite reason. It's to try and help you to listen and choose with your ears, not your eyes. It's an unfortunate byproduct of where we're at with an industry that's swamped with impulse responses and swamped with choice, that people gravitate towards the things that everybody else says are good. And I ask you to trust my expertise as an engineer, that I've chosen probably some of those microphones that you know well. And if you are a professional, you will recognize the sound of them. It'll be obvious to you anyway. But what I really want is for people to start listening and choosing the thing they like the sound of. And as a creator, I want the freedom to choose the microphone that I think sounds best in the moment, and not be thinking, wow, if I use that microphone, that's not, the Neumann U67 or whatever, then people are going to think that that's not good. We have to get away from that, I think, really, as a community in the guitar world specifically, and start listening and choosing with our ears, not our eyes. So this is tailored towards helping that to happen. It's not an obfuscation for any kind of nefarious reason. It really is just to free you from that, what you've got used to, of going straight into the pack, into the folder for the SM57, loading it up, and that's, or U87 or whatever it is that you like, the microphone that you've learned from listening to other people telling you that's the best, that's the one you should always use. Those kind of words, they are heresy in my term. The way that I look at professional recording, it's like, you imagine all of the things that would never have happened in music if that were a reality, that you always do this and you never do that. The Beatles certainly wouldn't have happened. There's a lot of stuff, that was iconic in the world of music that would never have happened if we all lived by that doctrine. So I say, stop doing that if you can possibly manage it. Start listening and choosing things by how they sound. And what you end up with at the end of that can only be something you like because you chose it with your ears. You decided to choose that because you liked how it sounded. So that's why we're doing it that way. And we hope that you can get behind that notion and join in with it as a concept, because it is liberating. It stops you having to be so focused on, is what I'm using what other people would use? Just, do you like it or not, is all really that should matter. So enough of that rant. But let's get into this now. So low volume, the speaker is behaving, as I said, kind of like an EQ. It's just taking all the high frequency away. It's still well placed with good mics in good positions, so it's still going to sound good. But now let's turn it up. And don't make any misconceptions. I say this in almost every video. The neural amp modeler is adding gain or imagining gain or making up the situation here with the sound of this profile. It doesn't do that. The input gain is literally the amount of level going in, and that's it. It doesn't change it or add anything else. So, there's nothing algorithmic happening here. This is all what's been captured. This is all real behavior. So here's the loud. So listen in the high notes, particularly there. Let me go back to the opposite again. Just try and get the volumes the same. So process is, do it as quick as I can. Now I can feel a difference when I'm playing as well. The best way I can describe it is kind of spongy. Like it feels like it's floating on top of something a little bit. When you play when it's really quiet, it's quite immediate and it's very kind of sharp. You play a note and it's bang. When you play with this gain up, with the speaker distortion and compression going on, everything seems to be just a little bit squished. And it's nice under the fingers. It feels good and it adds a lot of... There's nothing harsh in that. It's really nice on the ears. So I'm not going to do that now. We're going to do that in another video, but just to show you that, yes, all these things that we're talking about, they're all for you to discover, but the input gain also is a complete kind of unlimited range of volumes that the speaker is running at that you can experiment with as well to get not just the EQ that you want, but the behavior that you want and that amount of squash that really suits the sound that you're putting through it. So on we go. Next one, clear. So this, as it says, bit of a bright sound, not in a harsh way, but more detail, focusing more towards the middle of the speaker and using microphones that capture more detail. So here you've got a 2-piece pickup with a condenser microphone on one cone and a dynamic on the other, both near the center. Nice and clear. Detail. And deep. Okay, so this is deep. What the word means, quite literally distance from the speaker. This is all kind of, imagine that you take no microphones close to it at all. We move everything back from the speaker like a meter at least, and further with room mics too. So you start your pickup from like a meter away and you get deep in the room, but also deep in the sound. The further you get away, the less of those really bright frequencies it will pick up, and you end up with something a little bit more kind of round. A real sense of space.
Whereas people would normally be selecting your IR, getting a sound that's close to it, then getting another plug in, then trying to put some other things in. And every time you're taking a bit of its soul away.
This is just I've combined this from mics that are in the pack, right? So everything I'm doing here, I'm doing with the raw ingredients that are in the pack. So if you like this sound but think you'd like a bit less room, obviously, you can do the same thing. You can put your two mics together and then turn the room down. You can't do that with an IR unless they've created one like that for you.
Yeah.
And of course, what that leads to is hundreds of IRs. When you see how many mics are in this pack, I'm hoping you're going to be shocked, because the possibilities are infinite and they're all your preference once you understand how to use them. But the actual number of raw ingredients you need to create that unlimited palette is really small compared to what we're used to with the number of impulse responses that you'd find. There are hundreds and even thousands in some of those packs.
100 free impulse responses.
And you have to wade through it all.
Select your favourite one.
If you're lucky and the creator has been descriptive in the names of them, then you might be able to decipher, the intent, or even at least the setup of that IR and what it represents in terms of microphones on speakers. But, that's if you're lucky. Most of them don't have that descriptive system going on, and you just have to kind of listen to it and go, I have no idea what this is, but it sounds all right to me, and that's cool. Don't get me wrong. That's exactly what I'm all about. If you like the sound of it, then that's good. That's the way to choose. But when you have hundreds of them, it's a daunting prospect to spend your afternoon going through them all to find the one you like the most and remembering them all, right?
Where's the choice paralysis, and then you settle with your best one of the bunch, and you actually get away from the sound that you're trying to.
I give up, man. I get to a point I'm like, oh, that'll do.
Yeah,
and that you should never do that.
Yeah, and that's literally what it is.
Yeah.
And then when you get further down in your process of creating that music, and now it's not starting to fit into the mix. Do I go and select another one? Do I bring EQ into the mix? Do I get another plugin?
And you're using a non-linear profile, right? Yeah. So the first thing you're going to do is go, oh man, there's a harsh frequency there.
I need to go and do
it's just
something.
An equalizer. Yeah. So like this note is loud and this note is quiet because it's an equalizer, right? You've got a peak. You play the note that is that frequency and it's going to be louder. An impulse response is an equalization curve. That's all it is.
Yeah.
A bit of ambience, like reverb. But other than that, it's completely non-linear EQ.
And that can't do the voodoo. That can't do the unexplained part because it doesn't know.
Right, exactly. You've got it. That's exactly the difference, right? So it's really difficult to explain the concept sometimes. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've become so accepting of impulse responses, because the difference is the idea of non-linear behavior can be something that people are just like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. Sounds good to me, right? And of course, it does sound good. That's a bigger problem because it can sound good in isolation, because that frequency sticking out on that note is not a big deal. But when you then start trying to mix that with other instruments,
that's where you lose the magic.
Well, what you do then is you reach for the EQ and you try and turn that down because it's nasty, it sounds bad, and then of course you change other things in the phase characteristics of the sound, because equalization is very destructive. We were taught as engineers when we were learning, that EQ is a last resort. You never reach for the equalizer. If it sounds bad, then use a different microphone and put it in a different position. And the EQ is the final tweak only. It should never be what you reach for in order to get it to sound the way you want. So, and obviously, everyone has different levels of knowledge and skill. I'm not saying everyone must do things the way I was taught, but I am definitely sure that it takes so much more work to use EQ to solve problems in a mixed scenario than it would do if it was just recorded at that kind of frequency response from the beginning. And you hear these people talk about, and it's absolutely true, by the way, that there are some old multi-tracks of bands where they were recorded so well that when you put the faders up to mix it, you hardly need to touch anything.
Yeah.
Right? And that's testimony to great recording engineers, a skill that is not as prevalent now because we don't have as many studios. We don't have as many artists with big budgets to spend time hiring those professionals. The industry has changed, and this is not like it was better in my day, but it was different in my day, right? That very much was something that people would expect. The mix engineer, and I'm not even talking about me, I'm talking about the generation before me. I got any old random stuff when I mixed stuff. People sent me tracks, and I'd be like, sometimes it'd be good, sometimes it would need work. But there was a heyday of that recording art, if you want to call it that, and I would, where people were crafting multi-tracks that sounded like the finished mix. Right, so last of our quick start files is called Warm, and this is all about ribbon mics. So basically used a ribbon mic for every position here to try and get as much kind of warm, nice, kind of cozy sounding frequency response as I could out of the positions. Like a warm blanket.
Get down from the chopper.
Yeah, nice sound. Again, just my preferences, me playing around, coming up with combinations as I would do with real microphones on a real session. And that is really what we're all about with this product. This is about recreating the experience of being in a real recording environment, putting microphones in front of a cabinet, and the sound that would come back on that channel from the microphone, exactly what you're going to get from our profiles of those microphones. And the quick starts are really just there to show you, if you combine a few, then you can get some interesting things going on. we're going to give you loads of extra info on that in another video, as I say. We'll do a whole video just on combining them, and then another one on the more advanced sort of mic techniques and
Ninja
stereo and phase relationships, and it's all in here. Okay, so but I don't want to. There's too much to put in one video, so we're going to just go through the sounds in this one and talk about the mics and the positions. So that's it for the quick start. Now let's just go right into the list of the discrete mics. So, like, I know we talked about there not being many. I absolutely believe that I'm justified in the context of what you'd find in a typical impulse response pack versus the possible like combinations of sounds you'd be able to create with these raw materials is almost unlimited. I would go as far as to say anything that you would normally want to do, you know, on a normal session with a Greenback and a cabinet full of good mics, you're going to be able to do with these raw materials, right? So it's really simple concept. What I've tried to do is keep a kind of common language here that we will use for each of these packs that we do. Now, they're not always going to be the same mics. And as I've said, I want that license to use the best sounding mic on the day, rather than us say, oh, it's always going to be an SM57, it's always going to be a U87, it's always going to be a Royal 121. I don't want that, okay? If it's the right one, it will be that. But if there's something that I like the sound of more, then it will be that. And so we will make a little pact, you and I, okay? I'll always choose the best sounding mic, and you'll always choose with your ears.
Yeah.
And
just
that can't go wrong, right?
Just enjoy playing guitar.
Exactly.
Not fiddling and
so
picking.
I will call these as they are in the pack, and you will hear the characteristics of them, and hopefully that will then lead you to understand exactly what the design is of this kit and what it's all about. We're going to start with dynamic mics. Dynamic 1, and so what you've got is the name of the microphone and the position that it's in. Remember our diagram, the picture of the cone, the cap in the middle, the edge of the cap, the cone, which is the big paper area that does the majority of the moving of the air, and the bit between the two where they join being the cap edge. So these are the only things that you're really going to hear other than distances, okay? So just take it for granted when you see cap, edge, or cone, that means that they're right up close to that. And the other positions I'll explain that have distance, I'll explain those as we go through them. So for one microphone here, dynamic 1, there are 4 positions. It's all you need. A microphone that is dynamic in nature is suited very specifically to picking up things that are very close to it and very loud. That's their forte. Although you could use them in other places in other ways, you're effectively using them in a suboptimal way at that point. And there are other mics that would do that job better. And so those are the ones you'll find have those distant positions, or further away or whatever. So the two dynamics that we have in the pack, each represent kind of a sonic territory of their own. One of them is very mid-focused, which is great for guitar, especially for overdriven guitar. And that has its 4 positions as center of the cap, that exact same position, but off axis, the 45 degrees, remember? The edge of the cap where it joins the cone, and that same position off axis. Okay? That's important when we go into the combination video, and you'll see why. There are loads of, I guess you call them standard methods that involve combinations of on and off axis in the same position. And you'll see how those work really well. But those realistically represent the focus of your dynamic microphones around the center of the speaker, where they are most effective. When you start getting out into the edge, into the cone, into the distances away, much better to let your dynamic and rhythm mics take over at that point. They're going to do a far better job of picking up those frequencies because they're far less directional. A dynamic mic is think of it like a laser pointer. It only really picks up a tiny thing in front of it. The patterns, the names of the patterns and what they mean.
It's crazy. You just listen to on and off access and you can hear just
tiny movements. Tiny movements, yeah. So what you're doing when you're creating, for me, when I'm creating these profiles, I'm looking for the best version of that particular position. So when I say cap, I mean probably right in the center as much as possible, but I will move it around a bit as well until I hear that really nice balance. I'm looking for a balanced representation of a bright sound in the center. On the edge, you want a bit of both. You want to get a bit of the sound of the cone, a bit of the sound of the... So it will be not... I'm not doing it literally forensically, like measuring it oh, that's exactly, it's in that area and it's at the best sounding part of that area. All by ears. You cannot go wrong if you use your ears. I know this is going to maybe be counter to what maybe some people say, you always put it exactly here, or, you draw a circle and you measure it. And
it's going to be different if you're in a different size room. That's going to change it, right? You can't, it's not.
I use my eyes use my eyes to begin the process, and I use my ears to finish.
To walk into the room and not to knock into things.
My eyes to pick up the mic that I want and put it roughly in the place that I want. Yeah. And beyond that, it's all about how it sounds. Okay, so Dynamic 1 cap, as you would expect, this being a mid-focused mic pointing directly at the center of the dust cap, this is going to be pretty bright sounding, yeah? It's kind of a classic sound. Any recording engineer is going to know immediately what that mic is, but that's not the point. So what I've done is choose a counterpoint for this, a foil, if you like. For Dynamic 1, it's another dynamic microphone that's a huge favorite of mine, and it's kind of like, I guess, an upmarket version of the 57. It has a more extreme sound. I don't mean that in a like extreme. It's more highs, more lows, and more balanced, I guess you could say. It's less peaky in that mid-range, particularly around the 7K, the upper mid-range, and high frequencies, the very middle-focused sound. Dynamic 2 in this pack is all about more of a balance. Something that would be much more useful on, say, like a clean sound. But you want to get a bit of the roundness, a lower and a higher sparkle as well. So if you listen just to the difference, we'll do a quick swap here between Dynamic 2 on the cap and then Dynamic 1 again. So again, I've deliberately chosen a microphone that everybody wants and something else that's different enough from it to be useful. So it is, when you look at the way Dynamic 1 works, it's all about the mid-range. Dynamic 2 is spreading that out, giving you some low end, some high end, a bit more of a kind of more balanced representation, if you will. And again, if you're doing something that's clean, we take a bit of the gain away. Then it starts to become more interesting, because immediately you may listen to a high gain Marshall sound like that through a Greenback, and a very specific microphone is going to pop out and sound to you like, oh, that's the one, that's the natural choice. And that's all very well if that's the sound that you're going for, and maybe that's correct. But if it's not, and you're trying to do something different, people get very focused on this idea that, a speaker is good for one type of music. Like a Greenback is good for classic rock. It's not good for metal. Or like, if you want to do metal, you only should use a Vintage 30. And that pigeonholing is like, you're missing out on a whole lot of beautiful sounds. If you start digging into the way the speaker responds and combining it with different microphones that have different characteristics, there's actually nothing you can't do with any speaker. It's all about capturing it in the right way. These are huge differences that you get between the sounds of these mics and the positions. Huge enough for you to take something from one style of music to another, but arguably from one era to another. So look, let's show you here the difference between Dynamic 1 and Dynamic 2, just to get this concept across of one of them will be the natural choice. The other one will be a nice foil for that, something that's a different angle maybe on the sound of the speaker, something that will allow you maybe to get better results if you're going for a different type of sound than is traditionally associated with that speaker, right? Yeah. So quick comparison, and then we'll move on. Dynamic 1, so this is now with a clean sound, just so you can hear, like, because we're trying to go into something slightly different. Cleanish. We now go on to Dynamic 2 in the same position on the cap. You know, maybe in the case of the full distorted sound, you prefer dynamic 1.
Yeah.
You start getting into that clean territory. Personally, for me, I'm like, oh, no, I prefer dynamic 2. It sounds better. So that's the whole idea of the two, right? One's a natural choice. The other one is like the nice alternative that allows you to get out of the rut of doing the same thing all the time with the same speaker. So with that done, let's move on, just go through these now. And I shouldn't need to explain that concept again because it's the same for all of them. Each mic, there's a pair. Natural choice, nice foil, okay? So dynamics, we've done 1 and 2. They've each got their positions, 4 positions. Center of the cap, off axis, the same position. Edge of the cap where it meets the cone, off axis, that same position. Now we go into the condenser mics, which again, there's 2 of. One is a natural choice. There's no cap center for these because it sounds suboptimal for me on a condenser. If you want the center of the cap, you use a dynamic. So what we started with on the condensers is the cap edge, the point where they join the cone, gone right into the cone now with the condenser, and then added 2 new positions as well, which I'll explain. So the cap edge on condenser 1. Really, you get a very different character from a condenser mic. It picks up much more of what's going on around it, not just that laser pointer of that spot on the speaker. It
feels like you're getting a lot more coming back in.
Yeah, exactly. So the cone, again, you're getting away from the middle now into the kind of the big wide area of the speaker. Now, in some outlying cases, it may be that that's the tone you want.
Yeah.
Possibly. More likely, though, with the cone positions, it's something you want to combine with another mic that does the other part of the sound. So you're finding the cone sound that really matches well with maybe the kind of cap sound that you like, right? That's simplifying it, but it's a basic concept that these are kind of building blocks. So for both your condensers, you have those. One thing that will be immediately apparent, though, is you've got 2 positions that are new now that were not on the dynamic mics, and that's because these are where condensers, again, are much more suitable. We have a position called front. Now, front is 1 meter away from the cabinet and deliberately not out of phase, but phase misaligned with the main front position, the close positions on the cabinet. This will become evident later when we start talking about how we combine. Having things that aren't perfectly in phase can be really interesting. And actually, there's an awful lot of recordings that have been made where the phase wasn't perfect, maybe by mistake or whatever, but it became iconic sounding. And it's something that's familiar and interesting. And sometimes if you just want to get away from everything's perfect, it can be useful. But we're not going to go into that in this video. It's for another one. But for you to know, what front means is 1 meter away in front of the cabinet. So it's not pointing really anywhere on a speaker when it's that far away. It's just pointing sort of right bang in the middle of the cabinet. What you call the null spot, which is between the speakers. It's typically where you would do that kind of a position. It sounds kind of like you're standing in front of it, right?
Everyone at a recording session stood in the room nodding.
Yeah, as you'd expect. I mean, if you were a meter away from a cabinet listening to it, it's not the same as having your ear like right in front of the cone. Actually, that sound that you're used to hearing on a recording is very unnatural in real physical terms. I hope you never put your ear right next to a speaker cone at that volume, because you wouldn't be hearing much for long. But, you know, this is more natural, and by that I mean more like what you would hear standing in front of it, right? But also nice to blend. But it'll do funny things with the phase. That's intentional. And as I said, we'll explain that later when we go into the combining video. So the final position that you have on your condensers that you don't have again on the dynamics because it's really not a good idea is the room. And that means right at the back of the room. Okay, so it's the rule of thirds have been observed again for phase coherence where it's important, particularly when we start talking about doing coincidental pairs, Blumline pairs, and all that lovely Bruce Swiddy stuff, which is all in here. For a third video, even the advanced stuff, we'll talk about that and stereo and all those kind of things that you can do with this. The room position is kind of like the ideal. It's 2/3 of the distance up the room. Okay, so your sound source is at one end, your room, divide it into 3, come back in 1/3. The reason that's ideal is if you have any standing waves at all, and this room that we've recorded in is very well treated, so it's not a huge issue anyway. But if you do have standing waves, the least likely place they will be is 1/3 of the distance away from a wall, because they typically bounce and combine in the center. They bounce from the source, hit one wall, and they will be equal distance where they combine. So if you're 1/3 away, it's not actually mathematically true to say there wouldn't be any. They could very easily be standing, but they'll be minimized compared to right in the center or right on one edge.
There's some logic.
I mean, it's the rule of thirds. We follow that. It's an engineering rule. So you're more likely to get a nice natural sound without any peaks in the frequencies. So here is condenser 1, right in the right spot. It should be in the room. It's in the room.
Yeah.
Pretty weird on its own. Yeah. But when you start adding that to other sounds,
to other things, that's what's going to bring it to
you're
life.
going to get this real sense of space. And again, that's missing from so many records. They don't impart the sound, whether it wasn't a nice sounding room or it wasn't captured. It's huge. You listen to Queen, yeah? You listen to AC/DC, any of these bands, and particularly Queen, Brian May, because they discovered ambience in their career at a particular point, and then it became their sound. And, you know, the room is so important. It's one of the few things that will make it all the way through the mix and into your ears right at the end, regardless. You get the sound of the room into it, becomes part of the DNA of the sound. And it's almost the most important thing if you ever want your sound to be big. If it doesn't sound like it's making reverberations in the space, it can never sound big to your brain. It's just not possible, right? So there we go. That's condenser 1's room position, and it sounds different to condenser 2. It's a different mic. Obviously, when you get into the room, the differences are harder to perceive. But if I give you position cone or cap edge, so the close-up position on 1, very flat response, that mic. You can guess what it is. And then if you do the same thing with condenser 2, you'll hear, much like with dynamic 1, dynamic 2, it's a brighter representation. It's a bit more detailed.
I like that.
It's also a little bit less good at capturing the volume. So it's actually cracking slightly, condenser 2, and that's on purpose. It can be a nice sound. It's something a little different to the perfection of condenser 1. So that's the same thing. You've got the same thing going on for both of the two condensers, those 4 positions. Cap edge, which is the joining place, the sweet spot, and I call it that for a reason. It really does sound lovely. The cone, which is where you would want to get that low end and warmth that you could blend. Condensers much better at picking that up than a dynamic, because they're not so directional, so they get more of the big cone. This is a big area, right? And then you've got the front position, which is the 1 meter away in the space, again with intentional phase misalignment that we will come to play with later and will be great fun. And then you've got the room, which is back in the room. So there's one more microphone type, which is ribbons, and they have one extra profile type for a very important reason. A ribbon is a figure 8 pattern microphone. And what that means is, imagine it like a flat diaphragm. When you have a traditional condenser mic with a cardioid or a hypercardioid or a supercardioid pattern, if you imagine it creating a dome in front of it, that it picks up the sound. It's quite wide, but it picks up things in front and typically has a null zone behind, bit to the side, but basically front. Now, the ribbon mics that I've used here, both of them are figure 8 mics, which means they pick up sound equally from both sides. And that has fantastic properties when you want to do things like creating coincidental pairs, plumb line pairs, creating stereo from a mono mic source. All the things that the masters did to create that sense of space. And we'll get into it again later in another video. But ribbons have a very particular quality about them. They are huge. They're ribbons of metal, and they pick up sound. They're quite sensitive. You have to be quite careful with them because they're very brittle. They can be broken easily. So if I play you just a couple of the sounds from the 2 ribbons, you'll get a feel for what's different about them. So this is a real classic ribbon mic. Very often would be combined with something like dynamic 1. Because it's got a lot of low end, right? A lot of low end with a very bright center mic, and you end up with this really nice round picture.
A little bit of room.
It's a classic, famous combination. Dynamic 1, ribbon 1 together, all day long. great combo because it brings the low end back into the sound in a nice warm way. There you have the cap edge, you have the cone, you have the front, just like you do with the dynamics, and a room, just like you do with the dynamics.
It's insane.
Pretty weird.
It's just behaving like you're in the room.
Pretty weird on its own. And then ribbon 2, which is a very different sounding ribbon, much bigger, much warmer sound. Less of that like extreme low end focus with the kind of real sub bass thing going on. Ribbon 2, I mean, if you take ribbon 2 as a front position. Cool sound. Again, kind of in the room feel. But okay, so the last profile of the microphone type we have here is what's called room off axis. So we said ribbon mics, figure 8, they pick up in 2 directions.
Yeah.
So if you're pointing them at something, they'll pick it up and they'll pick up what's bouncing off the wall behind them. The off axis position, what it represents and how this will be useful is apparent in later video where we go into the advanced stuff. But imagine that that's your microphone, it's pointing at the source, it's picking up the sound coming back and the things that are coming in from behind it. Now, off axis for the ribbons is this. Exactly the same position.
It's going to take it from
but turned through 90 degrees. So now it's picking up from beside.
Now you're getting...
Yeah. So when we get into the advanced mic technique stuff, having that... And one thing that's really great about this, okay, this is where we get into this is better than reality situation. If you want to create a blumline pair or coincidental pair, you need 2 mics that are the same, as close as possible. You used to have to buy matched pairs. It cost a lot of money. You get 2 expensive mics that are very close, sound close to each other, right? And sometimes you'd have to buy and sell them.
Yeah.
And a lot of the studios used to do that until you get one that's a good match.
Shaking them.
If it's something that you do regularly, you really wanted that, right?
Yeah.
If you ever watch any of Bruce Swedian's videos about his mic collection, and he's a master of this stuff. You listen to Man in the Mirror or you know, all the Michael Jackson stuff. He's all about capturing natural ambience.
Yeah.
And if you're even slightly interested in mic technique, go and buy his book. You will not regret it. It's a masterclass. He literally wrote the book. It is the book on mic technique. But anyway, going down a rabbit hole there. But if you want to get into the stuff that he used to do, and a lot of other people since, because it was just so influential on all of us engineers, then you're going to want these off-axis positions. But why is this better than reality? Because we can use the same mic in the same exact physical location in space and rotate it to create the second profile, which, of course, defies the laws of physics. There's no way you can do that in reality in real time. So it sounds...
Unless you somehow manage to crush a microphone together, not break everything, and allow it to stay in place.
If you made a microphone that somehow was 2 diaphragms, but again, the physical intersection would change the sound.
Yeah.
This is literally the idea. It's better than real in that respect, that you can't do it in reality. So it's going to be the kind of the ultimate version of that technique, because it's allowing you to have the same diaphragm, the same microphone in the same physical space, doing both positions. So you get perfect phase coherence, and the sound is really, really great. And so anyway, another video, another time. But that's what the room off-axis position means for the ribbons. You only have it for ribbons, not for condensers, because it needs a figure 8 microphone for it to be useful. And the 2 ribbons in this case, both are figure 8 mics. They have different characteristics. So when it comes to picking up the room and reproducing some really cool positional audio, like moving the sound around the room and that kind of stuff, you'll be able to do that because you've got the raw materials that you'd need. So there's one other thing, and you'll notice that I've been talking about microphones and how that was the last microphone position. That's for good reason. There is this thing called the Neutron sub. Now, this is something that we've designed and built, and it's not a microphone. It is a 100% tactile transduction device. And what I mean by that is it directly converts physical movement into frequencies that it then records. So it's not like a microphone. This is apparent, particularly because it's designed to pick up very low sub-bass frequencies inside the cabinet. All right? It's particularly important for two reasons. It's very difficult to pick up very low bass frequencies in the kind of sized room that sound great for guitar cabinets. And by that, I mean you don't want a room that's too big, because you want to capture ambience but not reverb, so that you can impart that character on the sound and not have it be some really long reverb tail that then stops you being able to add reverb in the mix. So the kind of ideal size is about where we are. It's about 0.2, 0.22 of a second long, the ambience. It's like the perfect guitar recording ambience length. In a room that size, picking up low sub bass is very difficult because the wavelengths are so long, meters long, right? By the time you get down to the really low sub stuff, that it has to bounce around the room. And if you're lucky,
You're never going to get it
just
clean.
happens to go into a microphone, that's this
It's
big.
like, I've got it.
I mean, there are ways that you can do it. They are convoluted, but it's possible. If you get on your hands and knees, right, and you walk around the room on your hands and knees until you hear the frequency you want, and put either the sound source or the microphone there.
Oh man,
you can do that.
You're not doing it.
Anyway, so we've designed this device so that it directly captures the movement of the coil and the vibration of the cabinet and turns it specifically directly into low frequency audio. This is going to sound weird. Bear with me though, okay? Remember what we said at the beginning of the video. Microphones and combination of microphones are infinitely superior to EQ.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. In modern music, we're more and more incorporating bass and sub-bass into our records, into our mixes. We're more used to hearing it. This is a byproduct of an old age where we had vinyl records. You couldn't put lots of low sub-bass onto a vinyl record because the needle would jump out of the groove, right? So historically, it wasn't really part of the recording process. It was cut away. As digital reproduction has progressed and people have gotten used to that as a medium, and the mastering process has kind of grown up with it too and learnt that they can incorporate more sub and low frequency in the recordings, it's become more normalized, and guitar sounds have followed that trend. And what typically people then have done is taken these kind of thin sounding mic positions and boosted them with EQ to get the low end that they want, which creates all kinds of problems in the mix, right? So we created the Neutron Sub device specifically to counter this issue, to allow you to have real weight and low end sub in the sound
without competing
of any speaker. Again, really important. You don't use this speaker because it doesn't have enough bass. Is no longer an issue. We have this device is there to solve that problem. So you can always have as much or as little bass as you want coming directly from the vibration source. So it's true to the speaker and what it's reproducing, but without the limitations of needing to be able to capture those huge wavelengths with a tiny microphone diaphragm. So it's kind of like, unlocking, I guess, a new set of possibilities with every kind of speaker, that you can now access the real low frequencies without the kind of boominess and the unpredictable spiky behavior that you'd get using an EQ to do it. It's going to be,
in and
again,
dipping and
smooth.
having to side chain and all of that jazz.
It's been created by a loudspeaker, not as in a loudspeaker, the physical terminology of what it is. The volume of it is loud, and the natural process of evening things out applies just as much with low frequencies as it does with high, if not more. It takes more energy electrically to reproduce a low frequency sound than a high frequency sound by a factor of hundreds to one in some cases.
It's massive, like
So sounds pretty weird on its own. Let me give you now my last little takeaway from today. Okay, I'm going to just double this track for you, and we're going to put just a dynamic one on the cap on one of them, and I'm going to bring the sub up on the other, so you can hear how this now gives you a completely new type of control that you would have really struggled to do with EQ without really destroying the sound in phase terms. And I mean that really technically, and how useful it would be in a mix. if you tried to do this with an equalizer. And I wanted particularly to listen to what happens to the high frequency notes when you combine them with the sub. I'm going to over accentuate it just for this example. So just to calibrate your ears a bit again. I'm going to label this track so I don't lose where I am. Which is which? This is the first one because it's big. There we go. So this is the sub. All right, and this is dynamic one. So we just solo this up. Okay, so this is dynamic microphone, center of the cap, first position you heard. Okay, ears calibrated. Here comes the sub.
You feel the difference. So you might not have the same genetic makeup as me, but feeling your cheeks when you've got the sub on versus the other one, it's like you can feel it.
Listen to the bass on these high notes.
That's it. It hit. Yeah.
You could do that with EQ.
Yeah.
But now listen to the bass on the low note. Now, if you did it with EQ, the low notes would be going really boomy and loud and bassy, because in order to get that amount of bass on such a high note in your frequency range, you'd be boosting the low end so much because it's linear, right? It's an equalizer.
12 different layers.
You can't add that frequency to the high notes without exponentially adding loads of it to the low notes, because that's the way linear EQ works. This low stuff, it's thick because we've got a lot going on, but
it's like peanut butter.
I love your descriptions.
It's like peanut butter.
It's great. Okay,
like that.
Exactly. It's like peanut butter, bassy peanut butter.
It is.
They're definitely crunchy, not smooth.
Yes. Yeah.
So again, if you hear the sub on its own, you can kind of hear that going on. Listen to that weird thud on the high notes.
Yeah.
But the low notes aren't louder because it's not a linear EQ. This is a non-linear representation.
You're like, you stay there, right where I want you, and you're there, and then, I don't want to, rather than...
So, using something like this to add low end to your sound is not going to cause you the problems later in the mix down you would get by boosting it using an equalizer. You're not going to find that suddenly you play a note down here and it goes brrr and sticks out loud. In order for you to achieve that thick sounding, and that's a struggle for a lot of people, particularly play a lot of solos, to get that really nice thick sound in the high notes without it becoming muddy in the low. So this device does its job perfectly. It's exactly what it's designed for. It's a great deal of fun to play with. It opens up all kinds of new possibilities with every kind of cabinet, and it really just destroys that notion that you can't use a Greenback for metal, say, because it doesn't have enough bass, or any combination of those terms. You can come up with any speaker. You have now the full range of positions and microphones and tools to be able to extract any frequency you want from any speaker, and all the packs obviously will contain the Neutron sub, as well as the microphones that we choose to be the best ones to represent the sound of that speaker. So there's really now hopefully a possibility that we can get beyond the tranches, the lanes that we've cut for ourselves with, you're making metal, you need a vintage 30, and you need an SM57 or a 121 or an MD421 or whatever it is that you decide you've seen enough people tell you should always do, that you're then going to do every time. Like, try and get out of that and get into this idea of experimentation is the real answer. Using your ears is the real answer. Having the tools to be able to do the thing you want without having to go to the extremes of using EQ to get there. Allowing yourself to play with this to the point where you can be like, there we go. That's what I hear in my head.
Yeah.
That's the sound I want. And you're doing it with the raw source, which is not going to cause you the phase and EQ problems you're going to get. Sorry, the the phase and frequency irregularity problems you're going to get using EQ to get that sound, which of course you can do. You can tweak an equalizer until your ears tell you it sounds how you want, but that's not linear. You start playing then, and maybe that thing that you were doing it to with the EQ at the time sounded good in its context. You go up the other end of the instrument, and all of a sudden you're going to be like, that's a problem. Better EQ it some more, and then again you're going further away from where you want it to be. So this is the way.
Yeah,
this is the way. This is how we used to do it.
Yeah, and I think from going, and I've even seen some of the really nice GUIs where you've got the different speakers and the mic positions and things like that. And what I think we need to try and all get away from together is I'm going to keep clicking until I go and find something in here.
If you're in a real recording studio
yeah.
with a real engineer and real microphones, there's no GUI.
Well,
just the channels.
The thing is, what you're now going to be able to do is you're going to be able to go into it and say, right, I'm recording this type of music.
Yeah.
And this is the type of vibe that I'm going for.
I want this kind of sound.
And these are the sounds I'm going to build. And then when you need to change it because it's not quite perfect, you don't have to go and find another one. Just move it.
Just like as we used with our analogy earlier, I want a spicy curry.
Yeah.
I need chilies.
Yeah.
I need rice.
Yeah.
I need meat. You know, I need these spices. These are the kind that will work well with this dish that I want to make. Learning and understanding these, I believe, rudimentary and quite a short list of tools required in order for you to be able to build any one of those sounds. It's worth your time. You know, you are worth spending just a bit of time learning how these building blocks work rather than constantly being spoon-fed somebody else's preference and being like, well, close enough, or I don't want to do it for myself because I could never do that, or I don't know how to do that. You know, it's actually much more simple than you think it is when you understand the building blocks at play. It's really just brighter, darker, closer, further away. You know, you intrinsically as a human animal understand how something sounds when it's further away from you than it does when it's really close.
Yeah.
You understand bright and dark. You understand, you know, context. You know what you want from the sound that you're trying to make. There's no reason why you shouldn't be doing this stuff for yourself. And these are the tools you need to do that. If you were in a real recording session, these are the things that the engineer would be presenting you as the guitar player as your choices. This microphone, here's what I think is going to sound great. What do you think? It's okay. It could be a bit brighter. Or can we have a bit of room in that? You know, those are the things you would interact with the professional in that way, and they would get you what you want using their skill and knowledge. So let us be that for you. All right, you're going to have to turn things up and down, but we've already put things in the ideal places. We've already used the right tools to capture it. We've put the right cabinet in the right space with the right mics in the right position. All you then need to do is be literally blending that stuff together and deciding, okay, there we go. That's my thing. That's what I want. That's what I want to hear. So we're going to teach you over the course of the next 2 videos how to get from this basic understanding of what's in the pack to a full understanding of how you can create almost any sound you want using these raw materials, even the really advanced stuff. Again, a lot of that is called advanced because it's very difficult to actually record. It's very critical to set things up in a perfect way in order to capture it properly. But in order to actually utilize those finished recordings, which is what these profiles really represent, what you would get if you had recorded that microphone, all of that work has been done. You really only need to now interact with this as something, as if it was something that had already been recorded. And you're going to choose how much of it you want and what you want to combine it with. So it's, you know, it's really a new frontier that we're able to present things in this way. And again, we've not even really got into in this video the changing of the gain structure of the speaker, the volume of the speaker through the input level. I briefly touched on it earlier, but you're like, you know, that's another infinitely variable thing that you can bring in on each individual part of the sound. So, you know, I don't want to go too far in this video beyond what we've done. I think that it's long. I know it takes a lot of time to watch these videos. We do have a lot to explain though, and I'm hoping that it will be valuable to you to learn these basic things in the longer term for you to then teach a man to fish. Right? It's exactly that. You can constantly spoon feed people your preference and maybe be like kind of like the DJ almost. I'm the creator of impulse response. You know, what I make is, you know, you're buying my taste, and that's great. And we've given you some of those, but no one can ever make something that you like more than you can make for yourself, as long as you understand what you're doing and you have access to the tools that they would have access to. And because you don't need the skill to actually create those recordings in the first place, to decide which ones you like the sound of and how loud you want them to be, this is now a unique thing. It's something that anybody can learn in a very short time and become proficient in getting what they like.
Yep.
Right? That's the kind of ideal. So I think that'll do for this one. It's probably quite long already.
Yep. And remember, for all of those things that are not explained,
we'll explain them next time.
And for all of those that we can't, it's voodoo. That's it from us. This is Neutron One.
Yeah.
I'm Jack.
I'm Stuart. See you next time.
Peace.
Hope that was fun. See ya.
We could.